So today we're going to talk about combining unlike fractions or adding subtracting fractions with different denominators. Now, I am very confident that you have seen this before and you know how to add and subtract fractions, but a review is always good. And we're tossing in some negatives now. So there's a couple little tricks that I want to show you to hopefully make this a little easier on you. So combining unlike fractions, things that do not have the same denominators. Anytime that you add and subtract fractions, you must have common denominators, whether it's regular, plain, boring positive numbers, whether you've got some negatives in there, whether you've got variables or just digits. Yes, we will talk about adding with variables and fractions in the coming weeks. It's pretty cool. It doesn't matter if it's fractions and you're adding or subtracting, you must have common denominators. So here are the two questions you're going to ask yourself for every problem that we do in this section, and at least for the rest of the chapter. Do I have common denominators? Yesterday, the answer was yes. Today, the answer is probably not. And then am I adding or am I subtracting? And that answer might even change. It looks like a subtraction problem, but if there's integers involved, you may end up adding. Okay, so slow down, ask yourself those questions, and walk through each step. I'm going to run through a series of examples with you with different things to point out on each one. Let's start first with a very basic 1/2 plus 1/4. Do I have common denominators? No, I don't. So I need to get common denominators. Now, most conventional wisdom, most people would tell you to find the least common denominator, the smallest one, and you use least common multiple or LCM for that. I don't really care if it's the smallest one. I want you, one, to be right, and two, not to spend forever trying to figure it out. So sometimes finding any common multiple is going to be faster and quicker and more accurate than waiting to find the least one. All right. Now, these two are pretty easy. I'm going to multiply, and you'll see the traditional where we change them, right? So 1/2, what you do to the bottom, you must also do to the top. I decided to go for 4 on the bottom. This one doesn't need to change because it already has 4 on the bottom. So this turns into 2/4. This remains 1/4. When I add them together, I get a final answer of 3/4. Okay, that was a pretty straightforward one. Find the common denominator. We knew we were adding. There were no integers involved. But let us look at our next example. If I have -2/3 minus +1/2. Now, if the negatives freak you out, perhaps you want to deal with them in the beginning and do two-stroke in the beginning. I prefer to do the common denominators and then I worry about all the signs later. I will also write these vertically just because that's how I'm used to seeing them. If you can write them horizontally, go for it. It doesn't matter. So this was a negative, and then this is a subtraction. So I've now written my whole problem, -2/3 minus 1/2 vertically. I'm looking for a common denominator. I'm going to go for 6. So this is going to be times 2. This is going to be times 2. Truth be told, I don't write the times. I just kind of multiply it in my head. It is helpful when you're first doing it until you kind of get in the swing of things. But after a couple problems, I just kind of do it all in my head. So this is 6. This is 4. This would be times 3 times 3. And because it's notes, I'm writing these for you. Now, let's pay particular attention to this. This was a -4/6 minus 3/6. This might be a case where you want to go back, at least while you're getting this underneath you here, where you go back and combine them like we did yesterday. You know, the way that nobody ever takes the time to write out, but it actually might help. Because I have a common denominator, I can combine the things on the top and the numerator. There's my -4, there's my -3. Then I can do my two-stroke. I turn the problem into -4 plus -3. We're adding, and they're the same. So I end up with a -7/6. Now, I circle that and move on. And you guys are all sitting there twitching going, wait, but you do not have to switch it to a mixed number. I'll say it again. You do not have to switch it to a mixed number. Actually, this is probably going to be better for some of the things that we're doing coming up in the near future. Now, it has been trained to you for so many years that you need to switch it, and that's totally fine. I will accept -1 1/6. But you do not have to switch it. You must simplify, but that's not simplifying. That's converting forms. Okay? And remember, we talked that the negative sign would go in front of the whole number, not in between. All right, let's look at two more. This one I made purposely with some crazy denominators to prove a point to you. All right, so 6/20ths, which we know can be simplified, and 3/15ths, which we also know can be simplified. We're adding them. But those are some big numbers. I'm not sure I want to take the time to figure out the least common denominator. I could, it'll make my numbers a little smaller, but I see this as 15 times 2 with a 0 on the end, and I can do that so fast. Okay, so I'm going to show you real quickly how to do that. It's not the least denominator, but it will be common and therefore usable. Okay, so if I see, oh, I'm just going to multiply these two together. So this would be times 15, and this would be times 20. 15 minutes on a clock, do that twice. That's a 30. Plus another 0 from the 20. I'm going to do a denominator of 300. And the same thing here, 15 times 2, add a 0. So if this was 20 times 15 to get 300, I'm going to do 6 times 15. Real quick, and I'm going to talk more than I actually spend doing this. If you think about a clock, right? Here's 0, 15, 30, 45. When you talk about the minutes going around, just do that 6 times. Well, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 60 minutes. 5, 6, plus another 30 minutes, that would be 90. And then this one's going to be times 20. 3 times 2 is 6 with a 0 on the end. When you start to learn these mental math tricks, you can do it faster than you can reach for a calculator. I promise. Okay, so now let's look at this. I have 90 plus negative 60. 90 plus negative 60 all over 300 because they have a common denominator. So I'm adding, but I have different signs. So I'm going to end up subtracting. 90 minus 60 is 30. Keep the sign of the bigger pile, so it'll be positive. We'll keep our denominator. Now, that you cannot leave. That is not a final finished answer. Both can be divided by 10, so I end up with 3 over 30. And then both can be divided by 3, so I end up with 1/10. I hope you followed that. The steps are basically the same. I just did more mental math than I had to do for the smaller numbers. All right, one last problem. We actually have 3 fractions involved in this one. So negative 3/4 plus 5/9, that's in parentheses, plus 7/4. There's a couple ways you can tackle this problem. You could decide that you want to find all common denominators for all 3 fractions. And in some cases, that's what you have to do. If one of these was not a 4, let's say that this was a 5, that would be my only option. I'd have to find a common denominator for all of them and then add them. But because 2 of them already have common denominators, why don't I put those together first? Now, if you were to watch this problem be done formally, you would switch the order here, and then you would switch the grouping, so you'd apply your properties. Most of us are just going to look at this and pluck out 3/4 and pluck out 7/4 and add them or combine them. So let's look at these. Because they are the same denominator, I can do this. A negative and a positive means I'm going to have to subtract. 7 minus 3 is 4. Keep the sign of the bigger pile. Keep the denominator. So this is really 1. Now that's super easy because all I'm going to do is add 1 to that 5/9 for a final answer of 1 5/9. Now, if this came out to be a fraction, let's say I got, 7/4, then I would have to, and you couldn't with this, but roll with me. If this came out to be, say, 7/4, then I would have to find a common denominator between the 4 and the 9 and go through the steps like I did for the other problems. If you can start to see tricks like this, it's worth it. Start looking for little things like that make your life easier.